Well, thanks everybody for joining us. In my role as Vice Chair of the House Education and Labor Committee, I would be really happy to be speaking before you today on this day of action for our children to celebrate all the strong and urgent actions our federal government has taken to support our nation's students and public education during this unprecedented time. However, that's not why I'm here today. I'm here to talk about what hasn't been done and what must be done. Our schools are struggling to reopen safely for the in-person education we all prefer because of the Trump administration's failed response to the COVID-19 pandemic. The US crossed the 6 million case threshold this week, and we've lost 184,000 fellow Americans to this virus. This is a tragic consequence of the administration's failure to provide the public health leadership and resources necessary to stop the virus. The Trump administration and Republicans in Congress put their political agendas above the safety of students and educators. President Trump and Secretary Betsy DeVos are bullying schools by threatening to withhold funding unless they reopen fully in person, no restrictions, without any regard for the level of community spread or other stubborn facts on the ground. This is all while refusing to provide the resources that schools need to follow the administration's own public health guidelines, such as it is. Just over the weekend, the secretary suggested that this pandemic was, and I'm quoting her, a good thing because it's going to really force changes that should have happened many years ago, end quote. Are you kidding me? Ms. DeVos, it's never okay for children's and educators' lives to be gambled for the sake of your crusade to dismantle public education in this country. Secretary DeVos has exploited this crisis to push her school privatization agenda, even finalizing a rule to direct over $40 million of emergency funding from our most vulnerable public school students to affluent private schools. And I can tell you personally, that was not our intention when we passed the funding in the CARES Act. She's siphoning money from a tank that's running on fumes. According to the Michigan House Fiscal Agency, school operating revenues come from 80% of state revenue and 20% of local revenue. So I think I want to ask the leaders on the phone here or on the Zoom with me, but I think Michigan's got to be one of the highest state budget proportion funded schools systems in the country. And with the state government and local governments facing huge budget deficits, it's just a double whammy loss for our schools. And the federal government simply must step in. It's been over 110 days since May 15th when my Democratic colleagues and I passed the HEROES Act to provide more than $1 trillion in funding for states and local governments, territorial governments, and tribal governments, an effort I helped lead after hearing from mayors, city managers, superintendents, and union leaders, including some on the call today. It also designates more than $100 billion in education funding specifically, including $58 billion for K-12, with $1.75 billion really for Michigan's K-12 specifically. That's why House Democrats included relief for state and local governments as part of the HEROES Act. If signed into law, this could bring more than $1.1 billion to the 9th District's local governments in 2020 alone. That includes $10,646,464 for East Point. We really know we got it down to the dollar for every city and township in this country. And for Mount Clemens, $5,349,398. Those are two communities represented on this call today. Since passage of the HEROES Act, the crisis for schools has worsened as COVID-19 rages on and deficits grow. While Michigan's estimating a less than $1 billion budget deficit this year, it's forecasting that the number could grow to at least $3.4 billion over the next 2 years without federal support. Now, House Democrats are fighting for $300 billion in K-12 education funding needed to stabilize the public education system and help state educational agencies and school districts maintain current services, and avoid layoffs, avoid larger class sizes, avoid cuts to critical academic and mental health programs for our students. You'll hear more about why this is so important from our panelists today. Let's recommit today to fighting this virus for the sake of children in Macomb County, where these school districts are, and Oakland County, and across Michigan and across our country. We can crush the coronavirus with testing, tracing, and treatment. We can have strong workplace protections so that teachers and children are safe in the classroom, as are frontline workers all across the economy. We can have robust support for state and local governments and our schools. It was really important to me to have a wide array of voices creating a chorus of how important this funding is, specifically in Macomb County. We have union leaders, a superintendent, a school board member, and a school professional on the Zoom here with us. And to kick off this beautiful array of voices, I want to recognize the president of the Michigan Education Association, Paula Herbart. Paula?
Thank you, Congressman. I really appreciate being here. You know, Congressman Levin talks about the need for the money that's coming in. You can only imagine the change that would happen in these school districts, the assurity for the protection of students and educator alike if we receive the funding from the federal government through the HEROES Act. It's critical. When we talk about what we need for the children, I just want to say a couple of things. If we needed any proof that the democracy is broken, all they need do is look into Washington, D.C. With lives of students, educators, and families at stake, lawmakers seem to be unable to reach agreements on funding to protect us. In Washington, President Trump and the U.S. state Republicans responded to the House-passed HEROES Act with proposals that contained no school funding, zero. This is unacceptable. Without the additional federal support, many Michigan school districts will struggle to keep students and educators safe. Reopening schools is one thing, keeping them open is another major obstacle. As schools in Indiana, Georgia, and other states have realized this is critical. And the only way that we can do this is if the federal government steps up and fills the gaps that we have here in Michigan for students to ensure their safety and the safety of educators and their families and their children. With just a few days of the schools starting, our legislators have passed bipartisan legislation here, but it will not be enough. We know that, and we're grateful for what Michigan legislators have done here. But without the federal government, we will struggle. We are committed to ensuring that our members, our students are safe, but we need the federal government to act. Members like Congressman Levin and the other Congress people that come out of Michigan have voted to ensure that the funding is here for our students. We need our state U.S. senators to act. We know that Gary Peters is on our side, a hero and a strong advocate for our public schools, as is Senator Stabenow, who once worked in public schools herself. It is critical that the Senate in the United States Senate vote for our HEROES Act to ensure these much needed funds come to Michigan. So my ask, as always, as my dear friend Dr. Hecker always says, David Hecker, president of the AFT, talk to somebody out of state who has a senator who doesn't believe in the HEROES Act and get them to talk about what is critical in their states to ensure this funding. We're lucky here in Michigan. We have strong advocates in the Senate, and they're joined by the strong advocacy of our Congress people from Michigan, like Congressman Levin. We must continue to urge people to pass the HEROES Act for our children, because without it, we are all at risk. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, President Herbart, and that is a great segue into President David Hecker of AFT Michigan.
David, you're muted.
It's only been 6 months of doing this. Thank you for having me. Saying education should be face-to-face, as the Secretary has said and as the President has said, without considering science and real facts on the ground, is reckless and shows no concern for the health and safety of students and staff. Not that President Trump ever considers facts or science, but it's science and facts that should determine what our schools do. Teachers and support staff in K-12, faculty and staff at universities and colleges want to be with their students. But as it should be, their number one concern is the health and safety of their students and themselves. Concerning science, what is the infection rate? What is the transmission rate? What are the trends? Numbers that President Trump and Secretary DeVos would never even consider. What shape are the buildings in? What's ventilation like? Is there safe water? Are they clean? Is there PPE? Is there social distancing? How many staff are high risk? How many need to work from home because they have school-age children? These are all important facts that the President would never consider and the Secretary would never consider. But they are the facts that administrators, school unions, and the community on the ground consider as they make decisions on school reopening. It's also, as has been said by Congressman Levin and President Herbart, irresponsible for the Senate Republicans and President Trump to block federal funds our children and young men and women need for their education and to make sure everyone is as safe as possible. We applaud Speaker Pelosi and Congressman Levin for their leadership in passing the HEROES Act. The HEROES Act is an example of their concern for students, family, and communities, and their knowledge as to what is needed on the ground. As Paul has said, we have two outstanding United States senators in Gary Peters and Debbie Stabenow who are fighting for the HEROES Act in the United States Senate. We need the Republicans in the Senate to finally put action out there that shows concern for our students and our educators. We need the Senate and President Trump to stop playing political games and approve the HEROES Act. You know, no one knows the need for these funds more than the people on the ground. And later on this morning, we'll be hearing from people from Mount Clemens schools and the East Detroit School District who are really going to be able to bring it home on the more micro level about how imperative the HEROES Act is for the children of the 9th Congressional District and the state of Michigan. Thank you.
Thank you so much, President Hecker. And with that, let's hear from Mary Campbell, MEA Local 1 President.
Hello, my name is Mary Campbell. I am the president of the NEA MEA Local 1 and chairperson of 6E Coordinating Council. I represent 16 school districts in Macomb County. I'm here to express that it is imperative that we fund our schools and during this public health crisis. Many of our students are concerned about coming back to school safely. Our staff is concerned about coming back to school safely. We need the fundings to provide that. We need the funding to provide the PPE that is necessary, including the masks, the cleaning supplies, and plexiglass if that's appropriate. We also need the funding for our frontline workers. That would include our teachers, your transportation drivers, your custodial staff, your secretarial staff. All of those need to be reassured that they can come back to school in a safe manner. We have teachers and other personnel who are retiring because they don't feel that the school districts can provide their safety. We have parents who are choosing to stay at home because the districts are not capable because of a lack of funding to provide a safe environment for everyone. So I would encourage the passing of this $300 billion HEROES Act because we need this for our students. They're our youngest, our most vulnerable population, and they shouldn't be forgotten or unheard. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Mary. And now we will hear from Lincoln Stocks, AFT Local 698 President.
Hi, my name is Lincoln Stocks. I do represent East Point Federation of Educators and Macomb Federation of Educators as their president. In East Point, we have and we realize the responsibility we have in providing a safe learning environment for our teachers, our students to be successful. The increased responsibilities that are accompanying COVID come with a high price tag. The demands for PPE in all of our classrooms, for our staff, our students, the increased demands for supplies and to personally sanitize the campus for our custodial groups and things like that are just part of our equation. There's lots of additional demands on our budget to help educate and move kids throughout our buildings. The need for smaller class sizes to make sure that kids are safe and the teachers are safe. The demands for hallway supervision and sanitization are all demands on our budget, and the need to be able to spread kids out so that they don't cross-contaminate one another as they move around the building throughout a day. East Point and others are being asked to meet these increased responsibilities with uncertain funding. It's funding that's likely to be reduced per student because of the reduced state budget, on top of the reduction in student numbers. I mean, a lot of our funding obviously comes from the number of kids that are there, and the online schools are eagerly enrolling public school students, and certainly are being supported by Betsy DeVos and the rest to undermine public school stability. The result of that is a massive uncertainty for paraprofessionals that don't know how they're going to be able to service their special education students, teachers that are near the bottom of the list of people that are in danger of layoff. We don't know how many kids are going to come through the door. We don't know how much funding there's going to be. So the uncertainty that teachers are dealing with every day is really significant. And as Mary had stated, we have a rash of retirements and resignations to leave the education field altogether. Without funding certainty and the necessary support the state and district need from the federal government, we have to proceed in danger of financial catastrophe, as our provisions are costing us more money, not less. In East Point, our teachers have suffered through and struggled with a reduction of nearly 25% reduction in our peak earning capacity. And now, as we're just beginning to recover, we are faced with yet another potential financial catastrophe, which is making teachers just panic as to what they're going to do with their financial futures. The staff in our buildings are concerned that failures to adequately fund the necessary support and extend families to unnecessary risk, that shortcuts would have to be made somewhere. And I know our superintendent and our union are working hard to make sure that doesn't happen. We find it as an unacceptable political game where students and staff are pawns to man the front lines while cases rise in our community, even before we're able to open schools. And we try to learn how vulnerable children are to the illness. The failure to properly support our state budgets and to make school funding a priority is simply wrong. It's a political and moral failure. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lincoln. And now let's hear from the superintendent of East Point Schools, Ryan McLeod.
Thank you so much. I'm Ryan McLeod. I'm the superintendent of East Point Community Schools, and I appreciate the opportunity to be able to share and talk about what our experience has been like without the certainty of funding. I know and we recognize that there are lots of really strong opinions about how schools should reopen. What we've committed to here in East Point is to reopen only if we can do so safely to face-to-face. And in the process of that, what we're realizing is that this uncertainty of our financial situation makes it really, really difficult. We have just moved forward by continuing to go ahead and spend the money without the certainty of the funding. But that is, if you look around the area, we're one of the only districts that are still trying to reopen to in-person instruction. We think we have a good plan for that, but the costs are tremendous. And every day there are new costs that are coming up that we did not originally expect. And the previous money that has been allocated is much appreciated to help us be able to kind of navigate what happened at the end of last school year. But we are in a position as we approach this year where that financial uncertainty is creating problems locally in our classrooms and in our district. But I think it was previously mentioned how this really is a compounding situation, because it's not just our district, but it's also local funding of our local government, our state government. And the only answer really is to have federal assistance to assist and backfill situations where we cannot continue to educate students like this with the expenses that we're facing if we don't have that support from the federal government. So there's no question, this situation and the position that it's placing our schools in is worsening the inequities that exist already in our previously underfunded school systems. And we need a significant federal investment in our schools, especially at this time, to make it through this difficult pandemic.
Thank you so much, Superintendent McLeod. And next we have Robert Roscoe, who is a school board member for East Point Schools. Robert, are you able to unmute? All right, while we figure out what's going on with Robert's camera, we could go to Ted DeShane, who is a physical therapist at Mount Clemens Schools.
Yes, good morning, and thank you for this opportunity to speak in favor of increased federal funding for our public schools. As mentioned, my name is Ted DeShane. I'm a physical therapist for the Mount Clemens Community School District here in Macomb County. But when school's not in session, I provide therapy services at Henry Ford Hospital in Clinton Township. This spring and summer, that meant that I had the duty and privilege of treating and rehabbing patients afflicted with COVID-19. I've seen firsthand the effects that this disease can cause, and I deeply understand the responsibility that we now face to protect our students, staff, and families from contracting this virus. The physically and otherwise health impaired students that I serve in Mount Clemens represent a vulnerable and medically complex population. They require high levels of protection during normal times, let alone during the global pandemic that we're facing now. Failure to protect these children in our care could result in their illness, hospitalization, or worse. We've already seen the data that COVID-19 is disproportionately affecting our Black and Hispanic families, which is a population heavily served here in Mount Clemens. We owe it to these families to not only provide a high quality education, but also to take every measure we can to keep them safe from COVID-19. And in order to meet the needs of these students, additional funding must be secured for our public school districts. A global pandemic necessitates additional purchases beyond those we face in a typical year. Teachers should not have to choose between buying a box of masks over decorating their rooms. They shouldn't have to choose buying a bottle of hand sanitizer over filling their prize box. Siblings and cousins shouldn't have to share a device and decide who gets to go to school that day. So if we are to provide for these students the way that we know we must in terms of additional personal protective equipment, additional staff for cleaning to assist with physical distancing, enhanced technology for remote learning, or in times of student-teacher quarantine, we have to grant them the funding that's required to do their job safely, effectively, and fully. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Ted. And now we will go to Robert Roscoe, East Point School Board member. Robert, if you can unmute so we could hear you.
How's that better? Can you hear me?
We can hear you, yes.
Great. Thank you so much for having me on today. It's a great day, but it's the same hour for today that we need all the funding that we can get, and we really need heroes that can afford and other funding. I am a school board member from East Point, and I do apologize.
Hey, Robert, Robert, sorry, we're having some trouble hearing you. It's a little, your connection seems to be spotty.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
We're not getting your video, and your connection seems to be a little bit spotty. Or sorry, we're not seeing your video. All right, let's see if we can figure out what's going on with Robert's camera. Sorry, everybody. 2020 press conferences as they are. For now, we could shift to Q&A if any other reporters on the line have a question, and then hopefully we can hear from Robert in a little bit once we figure that out. So if you want to unmute yourself, or you can ask a question in the chat as well.
You know, Jenny, I just have to say that this makes me think how lucky we've been, because I don't think we've had an event with problems like this all this time. So we've had smooth sailing. So sorry for the problems this time. I was really looking forward to hearing what Robert had to say. But yeah, if folks have questions, we're all ears.
Jenny,
Oh, go ahead, Paula.
it's Paula Herbart, the president of the MEA. I think this just highlights the frustration for so many families that we have that are trying to go to school with no broad access to internet, you know, working so hard in these times when we don't, you know, something that the HEROES Act can do is support internet security, ensuring that we have broadband in places, hotspots, technology for students, because it's not safe for us to meet face-to-face in some of the areas in Michigan right now. And this just highlights in practice exactly what families go through. You know, the broadband isn't working, or the Wi-Fi isn't working, or my technology is down. And federal funding will help secure the availability and access for many, many families.
Absolutely. Well, Andy and I know that firsthand. We're both working with our kids, trying to go to school and work as well. Andy, you've had some Wi-Fi issues this morning.
Yeah, for sure. And you know, it also really highlights something. You know, communities hire people like Ryan McLeod. Communities elect people like Robert Roscoe to figure things out. States like Michigan have a governor who looked at this situation and said, okay, if, you know, we're going to assign numbers to how severe the COVID situation is, and if a community is in this level of severity, they could open schools like this. It was kind of based on science and common sense. And really what we need to do is give the schools, give the administrators like Ryan, give the
Oh, and there we go. I think we might be having a technology problem with Congressman Levin.
I went away and I'm back. It's great. I was dropped and I'm back. But what I was trying to say is that, you know, if we gave the way we had the money in the HEROES Act, it was to give money to the states for their education budgets and directly to the K-12 districts so they could spend money as they need it. If they're trying to do in person, like Superintendent McLeod is, then they'll need more teachers. That's the budget issue, more PPE, more space, whatever. If, as Paula was saying, oh, a district's got to stay virtual, then they need all the technology for that. So we need to give the funds to the educators with the flexibility to help their kids in the best way that they can, that's appropriate for that community. And it seems like the most American of ideas to me. It's been a basic part of our culture for many, many decades that we, you know, that we have a lot of sort of local school boards, local districts that do their best to have a great public school education for every kid in their area. They just can't do it in a pandemic unless we help them. And we've got to do it. We have to find our way to get money to them to do it.
Can I mention something about the districts that don't have one-to-one technology and devices? I think that it's kind of an assumption that most districts have those materials and can pass those out, but they're not, and we don't. And so districts are not only underfunded for that practice, but they can't even find the devices at this point. We have devices that are back ordered till November. We have districts that have all the devices where there's teachers reporting, and the infrastructure and the buildings, the internet is like this. I mean, there's districts who had to send home, you know, teachers or stop PDs yesterday because no internet service would allow all their teachers on at the same time. And so that is part of that funding need too. We need to get devices into children's hands, and we need to get an internet connection that is going to work for the teachers to communicate with their families. We are not going to be able to communicate with our families without those improvements.
Jen, can I add to that? Is what she's saying is so completely important to what we're doing as teachers. in East Point, we were able to make the investment, or we went ahead and made the investment to try to make sure that we increased our capacity. But even with that increased capacity, imagine you're sitting there as a teacher, you're trying to do a synchronous lesson with some of your kids, where you have some kids in class and some kids that are working online in a virtual experience or remote experience, and you have these same glitches. I can't see the kids face to face half the time because their work isn't or your computers or technology aren't working properly, or they have to go in asynchronous fashion. So you get very little feedback. All of the best practices that we as teachers have been taught to use to make certain that kids are learning and achieving is out the window when we don't have the face-to-face capacity. But then when we exacerbate that by not having the technology to be able to real time with as many kids as possible, it really is a very difficult situation. And the catastrophic loss of learning capacity that we're going to experience is really substantial. I mean, we've always been concerned as educators about the summer slide. Well, imagine what we're dealing with as kids are, fighting over which one of them gets to use the computer today. And that's a very real problem in communities like East Point, or worse yet, they don't get to use it at all because mom and dad have to stay home because the kids can't be in school, and they have to use the computer because they have to work from home because they can't go into the workplace, and how that essentially domino affects our entire economic situation as far as, revenue and just economic growth, because parents are where they are, and school workers are not daycare workers necessarily, but we are people that care for children, and communities and families rely on us to be that source of safe, productive care for their kids. And the technological glitches are just the tip of the iceberg as far as, add in all the other things that are there, and the drive. Educators are getting pushed out of the educational field because of this uncertainty. Who wants to work in an environment where we don't know what's going to happen the next day, and I don't know where it's going to be funded next year or next week even sometimes. So
true. And I see your coworker in the background there. That's a very cute puppy, I have to acknowledge. We have a question from Dave Eggert from the AP. Dave, if you'd like to unmute.
Yeah, thanks for having the call. I had a couple questions. One was about the additional money from the CARES Act that went to Michigan School District. Has that been, can you talk about that? Has that been enough money or is it just sort of a drop in the bucket compared to what you actually need? And then secondly, are you worried at all about the Michigan's tax numbers came out recently, and it sounds like revenues were better than expected. Do you worry at all that could kind of affect the push to get more aid from Congress?
I'll start if I can. As Superintendent McLeod said, we appreciate the money that has come down from the federal government, but it was just a start. It falls far short of, as everyone is saying here, the money needed, and everyone here this morning outlined pretty specifically why that money is needed. And as far as, good news in the state budget, that at least on the school aid front, things are not as bad as originally predicted, but that's all in the context of Michigan totally underfunding our public schools. So even if the predicted deficit in school aid is not what we thought it was, funding is still totally inadequate. And when you add on top of that what the speakers here, especially those from East Detroit and Mount Clemens, outlined as to the additional cost of educating our children and our young men and women during a pandemic.
Thanks so much. And we do have Robert Roscoe back, if we can try to hear his comments. Robert, are you able to unmute?
While Robert's trying, let me just mention, Jenny, that one of my concerns is that the Michigan revenue picture looked better than expected, partly because of all the funding that we injected into the economy, the $600 supplemental unemployment, the checks everybody got, each family got, the PPP money that many businesses got, and that is all gone or going fast. And I'm very concerned that the revenue is not going to keep up for the state at all if Congress doesn't act, because most of the economists, and this is really across the spectrum, say that the aid money that we provided really kept the whole economy afloat. And that includes people spending money, earning money, and paying taxes at the state level, and the state getting its revenue. So I'm very concerned about what it's going to look like on a going forward basis without more help.
So true. All right, Robert, I see you and you're unmuted. Let's see if we can.
Again, sorry for all the technical difficulties. East Point. It is.
Sorry. Robert, we're still having trouble hearing you. It says your bandwidth is low. You know what, Robert, I think we need to have you back sometime for a conversation with Andy. We'd be happy to stream it to Facebook and to talk more about, I know our school board members are the ones hearing so much from our parents right now with a lot of feedback. So we really do want to hear what you have to say, and we will figure this out. But all of our speakers today are right. This just illuminates how much support our schools need as we try to figure out this virtual world. Did anyone else have anything to say on the CARES Act funding, or did we have any other reporters with questions? All right, well, I so appreciate everyone joining us today. It's so helpful to hear your perspective. And if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to email me, reach out to our office. Andy, do you want to let everyone who's watching from Facebook know how to get in touch with us? All right, well, maybe Andy's having technology issues now too. I'll let you know how to get in touch with us. You can go to andylevin.house.gov and write us there, or you can give our district office a call at 586-498-7122. That's 586-498-7122. We're not there in the office, but we're all working remotely. We'll get your voicemail. We'll call you right back. You can call us about the issues you're facing with school reopening, or any issues you may be experiencing with a federal, state, local agency, and we're here to help you right now. We're all in this together. I so appreciate everyone joining. As a parent, as you know, as a member of this office, it's just really great to hear from all of you today, and thank you again.